A fascinating story and a chilling one as well. Now, one man who knows all about the trade in people throughout Southeast Asia is Matt Friedman, working for the UN Interagency Project on Human Trafficking out of Bangkok. He's witnessed slavery's effect on individuals and indeed entire communities. Well, I asked him a little earlier about the Mekong Project. That's an initiative to combat trafficking.
The Mekong Club is a group of private sector individuals who come from different companies who basically have a skill set that could be used to address human trafficking. It's only a couple of months old, but what it is a group of individuals that realize that within the private sector, that's where most of human trafficking takes place. So it's up to business to address the bad business because they know how to do it. They know how to do it a lot better than oftentimes the developmental sector because they understand supply chains, they understand how these relationships and so forth work. So the idea is for them to have individuals come together, provide voluntary pro bono support, a certain amount of finances to identify where the comparative advantage of the private sector is to be able to solve this problem.
And very simply, tell me, what is the comparative advantage? Where is the private sector most useful or most efficient in this?
I think when it comes to, for instance, identifying technologies that are using smartphones or iPads to basically be tools for allowing translation to take place, for instance, in remote areas. Because you could all of a sudden have a device where you have a possible law enforcement person in front of a victim, but they can't communicate with them. So you take some type of device that allows for immediately them to be able to communicate. That's one example. Another example is having the legal community address civil remedies, sort of seizure of assets. There's a certain number of traffickers that don't mind if they go to jail for 2 years, but if you touch their assets, then they're really going to have a problem with that.
You told me that the illicit profits from slavery is around about $32 billion.
That's correct, yeah.
And the United Nations and various NGOs tied up with anti-slavery get roughly $350 million
That's right.
funding.
Yeah.
So it doesn't sound like there's a strong will to be funding this yet.
Yeah. Well, do the math, okay? Basically what we're talking about here is $32 billion, $350 million. The amount of potato chips consumed in the United States is $6 billion worth. The amount of chewing gum is $1 billion. The amount of money coming from donor countries and foundations around $350 million. Is slavery really as important as we say it is when you stop and compare those numbers? I don't know. I mean, do the math.
Well, do the math, and the answer would seem to be no, it's not. Why?
I think it's partly because the world is strapped for discretionary cash to go out. The other thing is, I'm not sure that the human trafficking sector has done a good enough job of identifying what the baseline is, and then once cash was available, being able to say, as a result of this money, we've been able to do X, Y, and Z. So what happens with donors is they see this and they say, okay, well, we don't know whether or not our contributions are really making a difference if we can't measure it over time. That's changed. You have a lot of organizations like UNICEF and IOM and ILO and UNODC and our organization that are collecting the information and addressing in a way that is going to really help us to answer those questions. But it's essential that we really need to do this research, because in the absence of research, it's almost like we're trying to figure out what to do in the dark.
Well, that's right. I mean, is there a clear metric that you can tell us about which measures the success of anti-slavery programs?
I think a lot of it has to be, at present, it's the small projects that are out there doing the good work that are able to help people on an individual basis. But in terms of being able to quantify that and have it trickle up to a combined understanding, it hasn't happened, but it needs to. And I think part of the reason why it needs to is that we do know what's required to address human trafficking. We have examples of successful programs all over the place. We have been able to demonstrate how to go after the criminal element. We have supportive governments. We have the private sector that's interested, the NGO sector that's interested, the UN that's interested.
What's the missing ingredient then? Money?
No, well, I think a lot of it is money, but when I say money, I say it's for very specific things too, and this is why the private sector is so alluring in a sense. We need talent. We need skill sets. We need lawyers. We need psychosocial people. We need people who can help us with our communications campaign and so forth. Not just foreign people coming into developing countries, but within those countries themselves. We have to build the foundation of those individuals being available to solve the problems that exist within their own country.
Matt Friedman there talking about the ways of tackling human slavery in Southeast Asia. Obviously, this is not just an issue that's condensed to that part of the world. It is a global issue, but that's Matt Friedman trying to make a difference in that part of the world. A little later in the show, we're going to be hearing from David Arkless of Manpower. That's one of the world's biggest recruitment agencies, and he'll be telling us why his company won't work with anyone tainted by trafficking, but explains that there's still plenty of work to be done.
Big corporate